More and more data is revealing that the Canadian economy is in fact imploding. We're going to go through a lot of that data today. We just had a labor market report that came out on Friday. We're also going to be getting into all these boom towns where the fundamentals are closing in on their housing market. So anyway, let's get right into it and start off with the labor market report. So Canada's labor market adds 27,000 jobs in May. Unemployment ticks up to 6.2%. You've also got unemployment in the United States that hit 4%. So, I mean, Canada and the US are pretty far apart here. So Canada's labor market added a net 26,700 jobs in May, while the unemployment rate ticked up to 6.2%. And I just want to highlight real quick, this varies wildly depending on where you are, particularly Alberta, not looking very strong at all. We will get into that later as we get into the more nuanced parts of this. So anyway, with wage growth also edging back up, markets trim bets that the central bank will reduce interest rates again in July, although a cut is still on the table. I mean, who really cares? You know, I don't put much weight on this. But anyway, the increase in jobs was due to more part-time work. Full-time jobs declined 36,000 in May, while part-time employment jumped 62,000. So that's always a bad thing. Statistics Canada said the involuntary part-time rate, meaning the proportion of workers who could not find full-time work due to poor business conditions, was up 18.2% in May, up from 15.4% last year. The unemployment rate increased as job growth failed to keep up with Canada's population surge. And it's no wonder when you look at a chart like this, it just shows you how ridiculous things really are in Canada. But yes, that is what's happening. And we're going to get into more data than just the labor market report today. So stay tuned. So let's first of all break it down by class of worker. So public sector employees was actually down month over month, which is interesting. Private sector employees was up, and you've also got self-employed that was up slightly as well. Very, very slightly, not exactly a blockbuster report that we're seeing here. And then we're going to get into all the categories, which ones declined and which ones increased. So the most was in healthcare, social assistance, finance, insurance, real estate, rental and leasing. I mean, doesn't that contradict the construction jobs that were lost? Because, I mean, they're kind of related, but doing the opposite things there, which is very interesting. You've got business, building, and other support services up. Accommodation and food services, likely because we're going into the summer now. A lot of that will be temporary. Manufacturing, public administration. The big ones on the decline were utilities, wholesale and retail trade, information, culture and recreation, educational services, transportation and warehousing, and construction. And again, we're going to be talking about this upcoming week about what's going on in the construction industry, because it just looks absolutely awful there. So anyway, let's get into by the province now what actually happened across the country. So BC, the unemployment rate went up 0.6%, quite a climb for British Columbia there. You've got Alberta increased another 0.2%, up 1% now in just 2 months, guys. That is a huge change in the unemployment in Alberta, and a lot of that is probably due to many of the people who moved having that housing equity buffer. They didn't need to get a job, and now they're looking for a job and realizing they're not there. Kind of reminds me of The Big Short a little bit. Saskatchewan, the unemployment rate decreased slightly after the rise last month. You got Manitoba that went down, Ontario went down, Quebec was flat, New Brunswick up 0.5%. Again, another substantial increase there. Nova Scotia up 0.3%, 6.4% for Nova Scotia. PEI at 7.1%, 0.3 percentage points increase. And then you've got Newfoundland, which is at nearly 10%, nearly back in the double digits again after they went down slightly. And then obviously Canada as a whole there. So very interesting what's happening there. And now I want to get into some of those areas where people are flocking to, where people are moving, because essentially the housing market is just a little less overvalued. That's probably the best way of talking about it. So let's start off with Halifax, obviously another boom town in Canada where a lot of people have moved for cheaper real estate, even though in fact it's overvalued for the locals. It's just completely detached from fundamentals, and all these markets are bubbles. But what's interesting is the fundamentals are falling apart for these markets. So the unemployment rate went up to 5.5% in just this report in Halifax, Nova Scotia. If we go to Montreal, the unemployment rate increased ever so slightly to 5.8%, which is in fact higher than Halifax. And then if we go down, we got more boom towns to go through here. One of them being Calgary, Alberta, probably the biggest boom town in Canada right now. You know, Calgary is just this amazing place. You're not going to experience wildfire smoke that is toxic to you, and you're not going to experience 7 to 8 months of winter every year. No, that doesn't happen. It's just absolutely hilarious. So unemployment rate in Calgary went from 7.7% to 8.1%. So much higher increase in unemployment rate in Calgary than in the province overall. The fundamentals are just falling apart in Alberta. However, the housing market detached from fundamentals, remember, because it's in a bubble. But when it reverts back down to fundamentals, my God, it's going to be like a crash landing. So Edmonton, exactly the same thing, more in line with what happened in the province, an increase of unemployment from 6.4% to 6.6%. So what you have to bear in mind is all these numbers aren't even accurate, and the actual unemployment numbers are likely way higher than even these numbers that we're talking about here. We're just talking about these numbers to gain an understanding of trend and where the trend is actually going. And I want to use Calgary as an example to give you some context on where the unemployment rate is right now. So Calgary is at 8.1% unemployment. So let's look at Florida. Florida was particularly affected badly by the global financial crisis, overbuilding. A lot of construction jobs were created there. I mean, it sort of sounds eerily similar to what's happening in Alberta. But anyway, what I want to show you is where that unemployment rate sits. So if you look at where the unemployment was from 2000 all the way to 2008, you never had an unemployment rate in Florida of 8.1%. In fact, it took the middle of the GFC in February 2009 when the unemployment rate got to 8.2%, which is a historically high number. So it doesn't matter what is causing that number. An unemployment rate of 8.1% is very, very high and something that people should not really be ignoring. But a lot of these people moving to places like Calgary, Edmonton, Halifax, Montreal, it's all based on emotions, and that is just never a good thing. I mean, you are literally setting yourself up for failure when you do that. But I just wanted to put that into context. And then we had the Ivy PMI that came out, which basically was very bleak for Canada. So the Ivy PMI came out at 52, which really shows how the economy is not doing that great. If you look at the Ivy PMI, we're now down here. We're at these times where the economy has been particularly weak, and this definitely is one metric that you can use that shows that. And then we've also had the retail sales data that came out a month over month now. For the past 3 months, I mean, we've only just had the March data come out. It comes out just so slowly. But anyway, the first 3 months of this year have showed negative growth. And that is with a backdrop of the CPI that is up, 0.5% and 0.4% over the past couple of months. So it's very, very interesting because that means retail sales are declining even more than that. And you and I, we both know and understand that the CPI is complete BS. It is not factual at all. It is just a base understanding of inflation. Inflation is likely 2 or 3 times what the CPI is. You can use shadow stats to just take a look at things like that. So again, what's happening with retail sales is showing that the economy is really cracking and consumers are really starting to cut back on their spending. But you know what, guys? You know what? The Bank of Canada just cut rates by 25 basis points. It may take 18 months to take effect, but I just know that that is just going to turn around this economy. This economy is about to do a U-turn because of that 25 basis point cut. Oh God, I just can't contain myself today. I'm so sorry. It's the weekend. We gotta have some fun here after all. Anyway, we're doing a live stream on the weekend here. Productivity. Just another number here that is just absolutely collapsing in Canada. So we had labor productivity report that came out that showed, guess what? Labor productivity is going down. And it's no freaking wonder when nobody can afford a home. There's absolutely zero incentives for people to work anymore. So people are just giving up. A lot of people are giving up and they're leaving the country, as we keep covering on this channel, because Canada is essentially in a lost decade in a depression. And even the economic data is showing that. GDP per capita is showing that we just erased a decade's worth of growth. So Canada is in a lost decade. Whether people choose to accept that or not is entirely up to them. They can put their head in the sand, but this country is clearly in a bad spot and in a depression. So anyway, that's all the data that I've got for you today. Also, please subscribe to the podcast channel that is linked in the pinned comment below. I would appreciate it if you could join me there. If you enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend that you check out that video there. If you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship BS in Canada, go to expressvpn.com/market mania. Fastest VPN out there and the one I use. I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves, guys. Bye-bye.